Kelsey. Thank you for doing the interview.
No worries. Thank you. Thanks, Kevin.
Congratulations on your appointment as Senior Vice President of Analytics International with HIMSS, the Healthcare Information and Management Systems Society. Exciting times.
Yeah, very well. I mean, exciting, and I'm sure that the end of this period of human history will actually, one of the legacies of it will be that governments, I think, put much more energy into taking advantage of digital technology to support healthcare across the world. So although, of course, this is a real catastrophe, unprecedented, extraordinary circumstance in which we're speaking now, I do think some positive will come.
I think you're right, and this will result in a major change in the use of the digital world and digital space. That's phenomenal. Can I take you back to your previous role very, very briefly? When you were CEO of the Australian Digital Health Agency, you were responsible for leading the establishment of a national digital health strategy, the implementation of My Health Record, the foundation of the Global Digital Health Partnership. What were you most proud of? As a result of that time?
Yeah, that's a difficult question. Well, I mean, actually, perhaps I might come back to some of the, programs and some of the initiatives, but I'm proudest of the team we assembled. So I think this is it's not always easy in the public service to create environments which support the kinds of talents you need to deliver success in technology programs. So you're talking about designers, obviously developers, but there's a very powerful requirement also for very sophisticated, cutting edge, user experience design and a whole plethora of kind of marketing capabilities which aren't necessarily conventional in public services. And I think one of the things the thing I am proudest of is that we were able to create an environment which supported and I think really empowered the team at the agency to deliver some of these very important initiatives, and in a way which was strongly endorsed by the clinical leadership of Australia and by consumer leaders as well, right across the community, from Aboriginal community leaders, through to national peaks like the Australian Medical Association. So I think that is, in a nutshell, what I was proudest of. And in fact, without that, both the talent and its ability to flourish in the context of the agency, we would never have delivered the success that the agency had. And obviously, most people will be aware of My Health Record, and some people chose to opt out of the program when it was being run, and others, the vast majority, chose not to. The importance is not whether or not people opted in or out of the service, which was to provide an online record of key health information that people could access wherever they are and share with whichever health professional they wanted to, whether they were in an emergency situation or just for routine healthcare. But the important thing was that we were able to communicate to Australians that they had a right to choose, and in that conversation and the legal rights people have to determine whether they have a My Health Record, Australia really sets a whole precedent for the world. So this was the first time really that such a project had happened globally, and obviously I think it's proving to be a very important asset in the current crisis.
Yes, well, to actually bring a team together though requires a leader, and so what do you think you brought to the party as a leader in assembling that team and helping them to work in such a volatile, ever-evolving environment?
Yes. Well, we spent when the agency was first started, and I joined as CEO very shortly after its establishment. There was a great job done by the interim CEO before I arrived, but it was more or less, it was a couple of months after it was actually inaugurated. And the very first, most important priority for the management team, which was not complete when I arrived, obviously we developed it subsequently, was to make sure that the core values and that the culture of the cultural priorities of the agency for the team it served were prioritized and developed. So we did quite a lot of work and actually iterated that throughout the last 3.5 years, just to make sure that the entire team was part of the development of those values and that people felt able to relate to them and also to express them. So I suppose my leadership style has always been to, I hope, to set out a clear vision for an organization or for a service, and to then empower people in different ways to play their part in delivering it. But the crucial success factor is always that people are able to do so consistent with values that they hold profoundly, and it's particularly true in both public service, obviously, but also in health. I think the combination is a very powerful and important driver of ethical behaviours, of integrity, of a whole range of very important human values, and so making sure that people are able to live those, I think I would hope was a legacy that I was able to to bring to the agency.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And yes, the alignment of all those things is so critical in such big projects, and projects that you said also placed Australia at the forefront of some of these sorts of initiatives. Can I actually just move to the HIMSS opportunity that you're now moving into, because that's an exciting time, really supporting the next generation digital health services in Australia and globally, and that. So what's your vision for your new role? So
in a way, it's I keep on smiling when I think about it, because it sort of brings together everything I've really been working on for the last 20 years. When I look back on it, I wouldn't have guessed looking forwards this would have happened, but as I look back, I can see a sort of thread, and the thread is really about supporting the it is government supporting public services, health services in particular, but broadly, sometimes more broadly, public services, to engage in a different kind of relationship with their consumer. So obviously in the case of health, we're talking about not just patients, but citizens, carers, the healthcare professionals that serve them. And what I mean by that is that the core to the evolution of modern health service quality is sharing of information, so that the patient has access, the professional has better access, that they can have a different kind of conversation that will build on that sacred relationship between the patient and the doctor, the sort of bond of trust. And without good information, that bond just can't be as strong as it is with good information. So if we think about simply this being nothing more than harnessing the power of the modern information revolution to improve the quality and outcomes of healthcare, that's been sort of the theme of my last 20 years of work and leadership. And HIMSS is basically what the global standard for digital maturity in various contexts, hospitals, in the community, and so on. But the opportunity to really promote adoption of the benchmarks that HIMSS has developed and is developing globally is what excites me, because I think we're at a moment now where countries around the world want to be able to improve their use of information, what you could call their digital maturity, in a way that they can share with other peers, that they can learn from other countries, other systems. And to do that, you need a common currency of conversation and dialogue, and that is what HIMSS is certainly in North America. But now the role I have is to promote wider adoption of the core HIMSS standard to enable those conversations to take place. And it's a really important opportunity. You think of the sort of extraordinary innovation that's being shown in the use of digital services currently during this COVID-19 crisis, and often in the poorest countries, in those that have the least digital infrastructure, if one puts it in those terms, and the opportunity to enable the entire world to just take more grip on the opportunities that digital technology provides patients and citizens in their countries, learning from each other more rapidly, is incredibly exciting.
Yes, it's interesting, even talking to senior executives this week about how people have come together in a common cause, if you like, and are just working differently digitally, and the general belief that this changes the nature of how we do work in the future. It's just a quantum leap forward. So fantastic. It is a huge opportunity. Sad that it has to also be accelerated because of the pandemic that the world faces and so forth. So in terms of the first 12 months in the job at HIMSS, what do you see as the core things that you want to put in place to move towards achieving the vision that you've described?
Yeah, well, so I think really it's I won't get too technical, but the tools that HIMSS has developed that allow countries to assess their areas for potential improvement in use of digital services are quite well tested around the world in all sorts of different country environments. But what we now need to do is to scale those tools and add to the number of them. And there's a new framework which is actually being launched very shortly, called the Digital Health Indicator, which in a way provides a whole new framework for governments, for large systems to use to review areas where they might be able to develop their approaches to digital health. And really, for me, the first 12 months are about ensuring that there is awareness of that new framework and access to the tools that can be used to improve digital digital deployment. And so I'm in conversations with a number of countries and large systems already, even during the crisis, just thinking about how they can get a baseline of where they are and then build strategies for improvement subsequent to that. So people are really thinking about what happens in the post-pandemic world and recognizing, certainly Australia being absolute field leader in this, the importance of making much more mainstream services like telehealth. The government's just announced a whole series of measures to make it much easier for people to access clinicians via video link in a way that just hasn't been widespread in the past. Really welcome those sorts of initiatives. But there are many other ways in which countries and systems and providers need to step up to start ensuring that not just, of course, should COVID come back again, how they deal with it, but much more broadly, just how can they, in the kind of world we live, take better advantage of all these digital tools. So another good example of a priority for governments, which is one thing I've been talking to a number about in relation to the HIMSS service, is medicines management. So how do we ensure a much more digital approach to medications management so that it's not necessary for people to necessarily always have to see a GP to get a prescription where they're known to that GP, and so on and so forth. So lots of areas to discuss. I should add, I didn't say that before, that HIMSS is of course a not-for-profit. So not a business in the conventional sense, but rather more a global partner to countries, and that's an important asset as well, because one of the important pieces of this is that as countries are able to build confidence in digital tools, that the sort of the trusted bearer of the standards against which they will hold themselves to account has no overarching commercial motive or any similar thing. So just to make that point. Yeah,
no, that's a really, really good point, because it takes being in partnership takes this onto a different plane, and because there's a higher order sense of global effort and working together. No, I think it's different. If it's purely a business, then it's sometimes gets driven by business imperatives, and not necessarily by that partnership for the greater good of people across the world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess obviously it's entirely possible that, and indeed I've always held the view that I don't think there's any particular inconsistency between the profit motive and public mission. And indeed the first business I set up was a for-profit business providing data services to health providers. But I do think it helps when you need to get things done, perhaps quickly, that just being a not-for-profit is an easier conversation for quite a number of public service officials around the world. I would just like to sort of briefly, just quickly highlight one thing. You mentioned it earlier on, the Global Digital Health Partnership, and the extraordinary privilege I had, both, particularly in the previous role, as the CEO of the Australian Digital Health Initiative, it was not just to support to lead for the Australian government on delivery of these digital initiatives, but also really to support Australia develop an international profile as one of the world's leading nations in this space, and in fact to be the inaugural chair of this network, the Global Digital Health Partnership, which now has 30 countries as participants and the World Health Organization, and is really now the core focal point for many of the conversations about digital priorities and strategy. And I just think one of the things about Australia that I've really come to admire is the way, and perhaps it is because it's so, quotes, much further away than other countries, it is the way in which it is really on the front foot thinking about learning from international experience, particularly in health. And I don't have as much experience in other public services, but it's a defining characteristic which I think in itself is a very important asset for Australia in its response to COVID and beyond.
Yes, thank you. That's exactly right. So just as you continue, as you move into this new role, as you think about everything that's happening, are there other opportunities that potentially come to mind, do you think, for HIMSS?
Well, yes. So, I mean, sorry, so HIMSS, of course, isn't just a business that does maturity assessments or analytics in that sense. HIMSS, of course, is best known as the world's leading membership organisation for technology and healthcare, has been that for many years, and as the convener of conferences around the world which showcase innovation in digital health, and the most recent of those, of course, was due to be held in Orlando a few weeks ago and was cancelled in light of the pandemic. And for example, that event was going to be the largest that's ever been held, to my understanding, by HIMSS. 47,000 people were registered to attend. So these are really gigantic celebrations, I suppose, of what digital health can do and where it's going. So it's also very involved in a range of other activities. Media, it has a number of media assets around the world which provide content and thought leadership for those interested in different approaches to digital health. And it develops communities too. So the membership concept that drives through the whole of the HIMSS values and mission is all about serving the community of those who are on the front line of health services to really take best advantage of these digital opportunities. So it's a multifaceted organisation that is there to serve the community at large, its members, with all these insights. And one of the key ones, of course, is just how are they making best use of digital tools, which is the bit that I'm responsible for.
Yes. Okay. Oh, that's wonderful. Tim, as we sit and talk, are there other things that come to mind that you think, I wish you'd asked me a question about X or Y?
I suppose you could, I mean, it might be worth just reflecting on the obvious fact that, health is the largest economic activity that mankind has ever undertaken. It is by far the largest consumer of gross domestic product in terms of public spending in almost every country, and also the cost that's most increasing on the government balance sheet. And yet it's been amongst the slowest of human activities to take advantage of digital technology. We've seen complete transformations in the way in which travel and financial services and so on have all adjusted to the new opportunity for them. And our banks now essentially have very generously given us the work that their clerks used to do. So we have willingly taken on all the administrative, or many of the administrative tasks of the financial services sector in return for greater convenience, more empowerment, a 24/7 banking service. Yeah. But actually, we're doing a lot more of the work. It's an interesting paradigm. Health just hasn't really achieved the same level of transformation as other sectors have, and that's a big question we all need to kind of ask ourselves: is why, given its scale and importance, has there been this rather slower adoption of these kinds of opportunities? And that's a question that I've been grappling with for 20 years, so too have many of my colleagues, and it's incredibly complex. There are lots of different reasons why essentially the empowerment of the consumer in healthcare has been much slower than those in other industries. But I feel strongly now, and I have for the last few years, that the pace of acceleration is really beginning to increase, and that we are now very close to, and I think COVID will be the sort of the moment where we push across into the tipping point where governments around the world, as they already are, will increasingly prioritize their investments in these kinds of services, and that this will, I hope and believe, have an absolutely transformative effect on the way people experience health and well-being in the future. It's much more than just remotely talking to a doctor over a telehealth link. Yeah. It really is about the way, if I could put it in these terms, which might sound a little bit over the top, but it's real, is the way in which we are being invited by modern medicine into a conversation with our molecules, which has never been possible before. We have genomics, we have a range of new medical technologies which are looking at us and targeting medicines at us using a precision which just was unimaginable even 30 years ago.
Yes.
And for us to take advantage of these extraordinary developments, we cannot any longer tolerate the hum and whir of the fax machine in the background of modern healthcare. That is the enemy against which everybody's fighting. It's the enemy which, in fact, COVID has exploited. So where the fax machine has been the ally of this virus in this pandemic, and has thwarted effective, speedy access to reliable medical information that can be used to treat a patient in an emergency department, and so on and so forth. So I think it's been a while coming. It's been behind other walks of human life, but I believe health has reached and indeed is being pushed now beyond the tipping point to really take advantage of these new technologies in a way that I think will feel to us, and indeed our children, will put us into will give us an experience which will make what we currently experience almost unimaginable in even 20 years' time. So.
Yeah. Absolutely. A question that arises from just listening to you talk is that health and other government agencies have explored to varying degrees a relationship where agencies work together. Health is one portfolio, but working with police, working with education, working with all sorts of other sorts of agencies, that will have an impact in terms of digital information.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, without getting into all the obvious detail and sort of this is a whole different area for discussion, really. But the there are all the advantages that of a health service that is able to share information seamlessly at point of care and securely. So, but there is also a very important and real and vital priority around the need for all those kinds of digital services to have appropriate social license. And what's absolutely critical, and the public and the media remind us on a very routine basis, is that too big a step forward in terms of digital adoption without the community being alongside a government or a service can be really profoundly catastrophic for public attitudes to these kinds of innovations. So it's terribly important that is a really recognised priority in the implementation of these kinds of projects, and certainly that was absolutely at the heart of the whole strategy around My Health Record. People have an absolute right to take a view that may be different to yours or mine or others, that actually they would prioritise the confidentiality or the potential risk, let's say, of their information being compromised, albeit actually with My Health Record that hasn't happened, but the potential risk of that being greater for them, a bigger priority for them than actually having clinical information available in an emergency at the roadside when they've been hit by a car. And that is absolutely somebody's right. It's very interesting how countries around the world differ in their attitudes to this concept of social license. So Denmark, for example, provides people with a summary care record, but doesn't allow anyone to opt out of that. It's a mandatory record. And that perhaps reflects a greater degree of historic trust, confidence in government, perhaps in that part of the world. Whereas other countries, Germany, very sensitive to public concerns about privacy, and so on, is introducing a similar scheme, but this will be on an opt-in basis. Of course, Australia had experience of that. Australia's My Health Record scheme went from opt-in to opt-out because of the importance of it being routinely built into the clinical workflow. The argument was that benefits wouldn't be realised unless essentially all doctors were going to be using it. So, and to do that required a big conversation, which was controversial. I'm sure you'll remember the coverage at the time about whether or not that was appropriate. So the social license of these innovations as we move forward is a terribly important priority to be respectful of. Yes,
that's brilliant, Tim. Thank you so much. That has been fantastic. Can I ask you one completely different sort of question? And it's you've recently joined one of the HardyGroup executive learning set programs or groups, the strategy and problem solving groups for people in the broad health field to be able to work together and share information and ideas and so forth. Why did you join?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. I've been in Australia now for 4 years, and so I wanted, so not that long, in other words, and whilst I've had I've met and engaged with many brilliant people, I wanted to be part of a peer group that would in a way support me to learn how I could learn Australia and opportunities and ways of working better. So there's just a piece of me which recognises that as essentially an expatriate, I can learn enormously from others who in the world of public service and leadership and so on and so forth. So that was one key driver. I think the other thing is that I've always believed fundamentally in the importance of my own personal development, and it's often really difficult to find the time to be able to focus on that outside of an enforced sort of meeting. So what I like about learning sets is the fact that as yours is usually a kind of 2-day off-site. You're either in or you're out. It's not one of those things you can dabble in. It's properly a period that you can set aside to really engage with peers understand their issues, as you say, problem solve with them, for you as well as for them, around areas, and just give yourself some dedicated time, which is otherwise really difficult to find. So I'm always been an enormous believer in the particular learning set that I've got the privilege of being involved in. Has the most amazing group of leaders in it. So very much looking forward to learning from them about how I can improve my own performance and approach.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. It has been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Take care.